Yeah. So you were going to say more about Miami. Please do.
Well, I think it's interesting that there's been this whole recent hype about Miami, I guess you could call it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, part of it has to do with, I think, Florida's approach to the COVID pandemic, which was sort of like, we're not going to shut everything down. We're going to try to, live with it as much as possible. Whether that was the right approach or not, I don't think I'm the right person. I'm not an expert, an epidemiologist. I can't make the right judgment on whether that was the right thing or wrong thing to do. But from what it seems is that the approach has been good for the Florida's economy, especially the Miami area. And there's the Miami mayor, Francis Suarez, who's now been on Twitter and social media and kind of promoting Miami as a new tech and crypto hub. And he's just basically saying, hey, come to the city. We have very favorable taxes here. We welcome tech, which is pretty much sort of the antithesis of what San Francisco is doing and has been doing for the past decade, which is saying we don't really, San Francisco's been happy to take the tech tax revenue, but the local politicians are sort of kowtowing to the more nonprofit people and the more longer term residents. So Miami, just by saying that and just by having a different approach, I think Mayor Suarez in Miami is doing a great job.
Yeah, they even have a Miami coin. They've got their own crypto.
Yeah. I mean, I know nothing about crypto. I don't know if it's a tulip bubble. I don't know if it's, going to be, transform society. I don't know enough about that.
Well,
but
it actually kind of pitches itself as almost like a nonprofit thing. They just say, they just say purchases go to just, help fund Miami in general, the city funds and whatnot.
But there's a lot of money in Miami already, and it came from South America. All the wealthy people from Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Venezuela, for longer than a decade have been parking their money in Miami because it's a safe haven. It's interesting because Americans, we sort of have that. Some of us still have that image of Miami as like the Scarface, 1980s Miami Vice, or like
right.
Or the Vice City video game. That was this kind of like corrupt, dangerous, sketchy place. But actually, for the South Americans who, buy property there or end up moving there, it's actually a very safe haven because it's in America, right? And it's not corrupt.
Well, yeah, relative to down there, I mean, it's like a Hong Kong level of, kind of scandal-free and secure, I suppose. Although, yeah, we'll get into Hong Kong and all their protests, but, that notwithstanding. Yeah. It's funny. I read an article about how the show Miami Vice was sort of a double-edged sword for Miami. It gave the Americans impression, not just Americans, I suppose. It gave viewers the impression of Miami as a particularly crime-prone city, at the same time that it made it look cool, admittedly. But apparently, it was not some kind of like, it wasn't suffering from crack violence and cocaine violence to an any greater degree, I think, than Chicago or New York or other major cities at the time, but people sort of had the impression that it did.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And I was reading, I think Mayor Suarez, the mayor of Miami, tweeted something recently. He just like laid out his vision for cities in 4 bullet points, and I think other big city mayors would do well to follow his advice because it's really succinct and I think it's a winning formula. He said, first one, actually, funding our police to keep our cities safe. So that's very in contrast to what we saw in 2020 with the whole defund the police movement in the more liberal cities like San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle on the West Coast. Second point, embracing technology and the economy of the future. So I guess that's where the whole crypto economy comes into play.
Yeah.
Keeping taxes low, which is a huge thing, especially if you're, used to California over taxes. And fourth one, developing resilient cities that will be here forever. And this is important because a lot of the Miami naysayers most usually point to climate change and rising sea level rise as the issue.
Right.
The biggest factor for being bearish on the future of Miami.
Well, even then, I think it's the distant future, so distant that it's effectively difficult to price in. It's just kind of this a far off abstract problem that has sort of plagued, you know, climate change. I almost said proponents. That's not the right word. People who would like to raise awareness around climate change. It's not like pollution up through let's say the 1970s, where it was mostly took on a local form of pollution that everyone could see, and despite your politics could agree needs to be done. You know, oil in flowing into rivers, or you know, Pittsburgh, for instance, was super polluted back in the day. A lot of local air pollution that you could actually see. The smog in LA in the 80s, that kind of thing. Now it's, you know, the problems of the environment are a little more abstract. But yeah.
But I think you know, this issue with the sea level rise and climate change, I think if Miami continues to thrive, and I'm bullish on Miami for sure, that there will be enough money and incentive there to, you know, take the necessary infrastructure measures to protect it. You know, whether that's a series of canals or seawalls or, you know, whatever engineering projects that would be necessary to, you know, preserve it as a city.
You know, it's sort of sad to think that, you know, you could point to places in the world that have done that kind of thing successfully, but then you think, well, can we do it here? And so, for instance, Amsterdam, right?
Right.
There's Amsterdam, and then there's New Orleans. New Orleans, you know, made efforts of that sort, but they failed. You know, the levees broke and all of that. But maybe we should have seen that coming. They hadn't been upgraded or maintained properly. But I don't know. I wonder if Miami could do it with more competence, let's say, than what happened in New Orleans. I suspect somewhat more, but probably not as much as, you know, Holland. Who knows?
Well, I mean, New Orleans is also an amazing city for its own reasons. It's a totally unique place. I love it. One of my favorite cities in the world. But unfortunately, it doesn't have the same robust economy that Miami does. It's, you know, solely relies on tourism. And I would think, you know, Miami and Florida would have more willpower. There, you know, it'd have to be some sort of, you know, public-private partnership to implement projects of that magnitude, because I don't think, you know, there's not the central control of, say, like you know, Dutch government to execute such, you know, large-scale public works.
Yeah, I used to think that, you know, I took the sort of standard conservative line that as long as it's private sector, government stays out of it, well, then you know it will be done effectively. Now I think, you know, it's really about sort of human capital, which can exist in high quality forms, both in public or private, right? So I think New Orleans, I think that was taken up by the Army Corps of Engineers, and of course back in the mid 20th century or something. But if they were tried again, I don't know if they could do it.
Yeah, the future. I mean, to deal with all the big issues of the future, and, you know, making our cities more resilient, battling climate change, and also just making them, you know, more equitable, nicer places to live. I think there's not a magic bullet. You know, people on the left say, oh, we need more government. If we just taxed the rich more and put more money toward government, then there would be more equitable outcomes. On the other side, you sort of have the libertarian side, which just says, get government out of the way, you know, no taxes at all, and just let the market figure things out. I think those extremes both kind of miss the mark. And I think there's a middle way to get to better cities that includes a partnership between competent local government and private enterprise. And that's why I'm excited about Mayor Suarez of Miami. I think he understands this concept, and it seems to be that he understands the role of government is to, you know, keep the city safe, you know, keep, you know, things running, but, you know, also be a partner of private enterprise and not, you know, be an adversary.
Yeah. You know, the red states have been making the pitch to business for decades, and it, you know, it hasn't seemed to really turn, let's say, South Dakota into a business mecca where corporations are headquartered relative to New York or California. So clearly there's something else going on above and beyond low taxes or, you know, government incentives, you know, as far as what turns these places into corporate behemoths, or the location of a corporate behemoth, and just a strong new economic activity. So I don't know. Miami, I think a lot of it is just the you know, the the effect of prior decades of kind of gradual changes that no amount of, I mean, not no amount, but a heavy amount of incentives can't quite overcome. It's, for instance, corporation. Why would Apple not move to South Dakota, move their headquarters there? Well, because of their workforce, especially their most high quality, competent members of the workforce, kind of the top tier. They don't want to live in South Dakota, so you really have that working against that. Cupertino becoming something you'd see in South Dakota rather than California. So yeah, Mayor Suarez, we'll see where that goes. I think Miami stands a better chance than a mayor of North Dakota trying to woo business, but we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, I mean, also Florida, you have, even though it does get hot and humid there, I would say overall the weather is probably better than the Dakotas.
Yeah, people generally want to avoid extreme cold more than extreme heat. Personally, I find extreme heat worse. But I also want to save rent money and kind of just shake my life up a bit and do something different. I've been here in the Bay Area for 10 years. And when I moved into this, now I'm getting a bit personal, but when I moved into this apartment, I was in my early 30s and it was the first time I'd ever had my own place. But it's got problems. It's leaky in the winter. And I thought about how this probably wouldn't exist if I were in Utah. I would be able to shop around. I wouldn't have to just kind of deal with apartment, with these kinds of problems and paying high rent. But I wanted to be in the Bay Area. I wanted to be in like the central part of the Bay Area. I'm right next to Embryville, as it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to try something different. I would rather experience, I think, a North Dakota winter than Miami summer. But we'll see. I think historically, strong cold has killed more people than strong heat. So I guess there might be, it just sort of makes sense for humans to prefer getting away from that than it's opposite.
Yeah, but if the projections about climate change are true, who knows? Maybe northern and northeastern cities will become hot places again.
Yeah,
economically.
As far as I know, the starker difference between let's say Massachusetts and Florida comes in the winter. In the summer, Miami is worse, but I think they're quite comparable. It gets pretty hot and humid along the entire eastern seaboard, as far as I know.
True. That's
a good point. Winter where it's, you'd much rather be in Florida than Massachusetts. That's where the real difference, the real value add for Florida comes.
Right.
Yeah, I've sort of thought this move I'm about to make, it mirrors a little bit, it reminds me of a season of, maybe an episode, more like a season of Mad Men, which took place, across the entire decade of the 60s. And at one point, the advertising company Don Draper works for, they're talking about how all the action is now California. The Northeast had become like this kind of crime-laden, kind of gritty place that sort of lost its luster. And the new stuff, the new glittering freeway, not full of cracks and potholes and whatnot, that's all happening out in California. This far out from the 60s, the Bay Area seems to me like the New York City of that time, experiencing, kind of dilapidated infrastructure, high crime, it's kind of losing its luster. And now, somewhat ironically, I'm heading back to the East Coast, where I see more of a future. So, what do you think about this sort of historical, even teleological aspect of American urbanism and urban life?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because, yeah, I remember that season of Mad Men, and also recently I rewatched the Woody Allen film Annie Hall, which I think was in the early 70s, and his girlfriend Annie talks about wanting to move to LA, and she ends up moving to LA. Oh, New York, it's getting so gritty and dark and depressing. All the cool stuff's happening in LA now, so yeah,
that's fun. And Woody Allen, even then, he was like, no. You don't want to go out there. No, you got to stay here. Screw California.
Yeah, exactly. He was always like, no, I'm not leaving New York. No.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of Larry David, right? It's a similar kind of like neurotic urban Jewish thing, like, oh God, screw the cars, screw LA. I mean, they go out there because that's where the money and the action is, but it's kind of like, their heart of hearts, they're always going to be New York and prefer that.
Exactly. But I actually think, maybe the 20th century was about, okay, the old staid East Coast cities versus the new up and coming West Coast cities, especially California. Now, I actually think the division is between sort of the north and the south. What you really see is what's called the Sun Belt developing and being where everyone's moving. So that includes Florida, and obviously includes Texas,
Yeah.
which has Austin, but then there are Houston and Dallas. I mean, these are major metropolitan areas that are just going gangbusters, growing. The Phoenix area, Arizona is also growing, and also the Mountain West too. So that includes Salt Lake City, Denver, and this isn't really, this is more in the north, but Boise as well. So I think it's
Yeah.
more the Mountain West and South versus the coasts.
Yeah, Boise is really becoming kind of a hotspot. I imagine. I mean, I remember this going back to the '90s. The concern about places without Californians experiencing the influx of Californians and bringing their politics with them. It's such a sort of a cliched talking point, or a way to approach the topic by now. But yeah, Boise is kind of undergoing that right now. We're kind of wrestling with that sort of situation. Phoenix is interesting. That's been a really, really big city for a long time. Like, it's been in the top 10 largest cities in the U.S., but culturally, it seems to have little impact, except for Bad Santa.
Yeah, actually, Phoenix is another city that I've spent, a good amount of time in, and I like it. I don't like the urbanism so much. It's sprawled out. It's dominated by, kind of single family sprawl. But at the same time, the flip side is that it's been an affordable place to buy a house, especially if you're from California and you've been priced out of the market here. And personally, I just like the desert landscape. I love the big open vistas and the sort of landscape and big sky of Arizona. But yeah, culturally, it hasn't seemed to make as big of a punch as you might expect. But there is sort of the history of the Southwest, both sort of the Native Americans and kind of the old Western towns. There's, you can take Route 66 through Arizona and you come across these really cool old, ghost towns, they call them. And I don't know, I really like that sort of old Western mythos.
Yeah, I'm going to be driving out to Miami, and I'm looking forward to the road trip. It's sort of, in a way, there are two big things about to happen. I'm changing where I live pretty dramatically, as well as going on the longest ever car trip. And I'm actually going to make a point to go through southern Arizona, because I want to avoid going up into the mountains and avoid taking my car through any snow. It's kind of old, and I want to put too much stress on my car. I want to avoid it. So even though I think northern Arizona would probably be scenic, Flagstaff. But yeah. So
I've actually never been to northern Arizona, but I've spent time in Phoenix and also like Tucson, which is the bigger city further to the south. I mean, there is a culture there. There is a culture. It's just that southwestern culture, kind of, a lot of Mexican influence. So actually, Tucson has amazing Mexican food. So if you pass through there, definitely try that out.
As far as Latin American influence on culture, the East Coast, all the way from Florida up to New York, as far as I know, it's much more informed by everything that isn't Mexican, but still Latin American. Dominican Republic, Cuban, Puerto Rican. So I'm going to know what it's like to be living in a culture more informed by that, rather than about 90% Mexican, like here it is in California.
Yeah, Mexican culture. I mean, it's quite different. I mean, obviously, even though they share common sort of colonial past and language, there are huge cultural differences. And I remember when I was in Miami, actually, I ate at a local Peruvian restaurant, and it was one of the best meals I ever had. And I think I also tried really good Cuban food. Obviously, the Cuban influence on South Florida has been big over the years. So
sandwiches, which are incredible.
Yeah. So I mean, you're gonna love the food in South Florida, and it's cool that it's not dominated by one country's culture, but it's kind of a mix of Caribbean and South American cultures.
Yeah, I'll have to get that restaurant name from you if you remember it in Peru.
Yeah, I'll try to look for it.
Cool. It's funny. I watched a time lapse video of a drive from California to Florida. It's like a 44-hour drive according to Google. I suppose you could make that in 3.5 days if you're really hauling ass, as Boomer would say. But yeah, I don't plan to go that quickly. But I watched a time lapse video of that journey and condensed it to 90 minutes, and it gives you kind of a superficial glance at just what you'll be driving, kind of the landscape you'll be driving through. And it's remarkable how much it looked the same all the way, from this person left from Walnut Creek, so it's actually local. They left from Walnut Creek, and how much their journey looked almost entirely the same up until East Texas, and then it got green real quick and very rainy. So
yeah, I mean, I think Arizona and New Mexico have some interesting landscapes, but I heard once you get to Texas, and most of West Texas is pretty desolate.
Yeah, it's just sort of mind blowing to be crossing 1,500 miles, and it barely changes. I mean, anyone who's driven through Central Valley, California, has to be kind of comparing in their mind the image of California with what they're seeing, because if you're driving from Redding to Bakersfield, that entire span, it looks almost completely the same.
Yeah.
Tumbleweeds begin to appear on the southern half of that trip, and that's about like point two.
That's true.
Yeah, just the look of the shrubs and the minor plant life that you're seeing, it gets more desert-like, below Fresno. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, I mean, back to California. That is kind of like what I like about California. I'm like a third generation Californian, so my roots are here. But it's interesting how there are so many different experiences in California, both geographically and culturally. It's too bad what's happened to San Francisco recently, and parts of LA with the ongoing homeless and drug crises. But I hope there's enough political will here to sort of right the ship. But for people like yourself that are making a big change, move across the country, I think I don't blame you at all.
Yeah, I watching. Clearly, I spend a lot of time on YouTube. That's becoming obvious. 4K. What's kind of fascinating to watch are these 4K videos of people just driving around. Whatever city. I mean, at this point, you could type in any city in the YouTube, and there'll be some 4K video of someone driving around within it for about 30 minutes or something. 4K drive through Boston, 4K drive through Boston at night, 4K drive through Miami, 4K drive through the Keys, south of Miami. So, looking at those on the East Coast, you hardly ever see homeless people, and you certainly don't see any homeless encampments. I wonder just how much that is uniquely a West Coast problem.
That's a great question. I mean, I think since there's no really national or even state level infrastructure to deal with homelessness, which, I mean, I'm not an expert, but it seems what I've read recently is that there's a huge drug crisis. So, for instance, what you see in San Francisco, when you see homeless people in the street, you're not necessarily just seeing people who, didn't have enough money to pay their rent and got evicted. You're seeing people who have serious, addiction illnesses, which is what it is, that really can't take care of themselves. And there's no centralized sort of system to take care of those people. So it's been up to, the kind of the more liberal cities to, try and address the problem. I think the infrastructure that was developed in San Francisco to sort of try and take care of people down on their luck was well intended originally, but at this point, I think it's doing more harm than good in sort of enabling this behavior rather than trying to, perhaps using more incentives to get people, off drugs and, back into society.
Yeah, I think that's actually, not to delve off into a political philosophy here, I think that's probably one of the failures of liberalism. It's just it's so laissez-faire in its kind of approach to life in general that, unfortunately, that's an example of where it fails. It's probably good for most people who are not addicts, but I think that's when people in China look at what's happening in San Francisco, they've got a point as far as that goes. It doesn't mean that you should be welding people in their homes to fight to fight COVID or anything. But yeah, that's kind of a glaring problem, I have to admit. But yeah, it's interesting how much just the raw realities of the weather, in fact, kind of limit how much municipality or whatever can tolerate levels of homelessness. So in New York in the winter, I mean, they're fairly liberal out there too, as far as, hey, we're just gonna, you want to walk down the street screaming obscenities, as long as they're not attacking anyone, I guess we'll just, just abide.
Right.
But when the weather gets down to 5 degrees or something, they actually go and force people to get off the street. That's where they draw the line, because they're not gonna let you turn into a corpse overnight.
Right, you'll freeze to death.
Yeah, so since San Francisco, it never gets that bad, in either direction, weather-wise or temperature-wise. It's just kind of this perennial problem, this level of homelessness. So, yeah. Well, I think I'll wrap it up.
Sure.
Cool. All right, Adam. I'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks, Dane. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. Enjoy your week.